Let's get started with our interview. And our viewers should know that I read DNA Nation almost 2 years ago, and it was a very relevant book back then, because any book about the role that DNA plays in our lives is bound to be very relevant. But little did I know that right around the corner was the COVID pandemic, when a focus on DNA and, of course, the RNA vaccines would suddenly put DNA back in the forefront. The other thing I should mention, one of the questions I'm going to ask Sergio about is the Foundation series on Apple TV, which is an adaptation of Isaac Asimov's, I think it's the best trilogy that was ever written. But they have a whole new section that was not in Asimov, in which the emperor is basically three clones, a young guy, a middle-aged guy, and an old guy, and they're all literally the same person. I mean, they're identical twins because they're clones. So that's another reason why DNA is on everyone's mind these days. But let me start by asking you, Sergio, what got you to write this book in the first place? I know you're a molecular biologist, but what pushed you into writing the book?
Well, I've been into genetics for most of my life because I was trained as a molecular biologist. So I am a biologist, but I work in molecular biology. And actually, when I was in high school, I wanted to study DNA because I think I was so fascinated by that molecule, by that idea, that I was so happy to study biology, and I was really into the DNA. So even when I was at the university, I was choosing all the classes where they were talking about DNA and genetics and so on. So, and then of course, some years passed on. I worked in the laboratory and so on. Then I moved to science writing, but of course I always followed what was going on. And one dream, like a science fiction dream that I always, people like me always had, was to be able to analyze your own DNA at home. And so when the first kit for home analysis came out, it was the first commercial one was 23andMe. I think it was back in 2008 or 2009, but the price was outrageous. We were talking about a few $1,000 for joining for an analysis. So I said, okay, let's wait. This will cost less and less, because you know how technology works. It's like for what happened with the cell phones, and every year it's cheaper and cheaper, and the performances are higher and higher. So after 4 or 5 years, we were talking about $200 for having your DNA analyzed. And then there was a Christmas offer, which I got on my Facebook. It seems strange. I don't know if other people, Facebook or Twitter feeds are like mine, but I always get adverts about DNA, and I got now with the Black Friday, I got plenty of offers for Black Friday for getting my DNA analyzed, which means that it's really commercial now. And so I said, okay, let's do it. And I sent my spit. I became a spitter. And then, but back in my mind, of course, I had a project. I had an idea to explore that, and then telling what was going on. I didn't have an idea for a book. It was not my intention at first, but then I realized how different it was from what I expected. And I was a molecular biologist. And I looked around, and basically there was no book. There were some books about people who were telling their stories of users of these technologies, but they were very personal stories. And I think they missed the big picture. And the idea, and I think the big picture was that the moment I got my DNA analyzed, my DNA became a file. And this file became a social content. And what I was looking at was a social network based on my DNA. And this was an aspect that I think nobody has had recounted yet, at that time at least. And so I said, wow, I have to tell this story, because the idea that we can spit in a tube and getting our DNA analyzed is good, but it's not spectacular. But the idea that my DNA becomes a social content that will put me in contact with other people, find people around the world, and so on and so on, it is very new and fascinating, and with good and bad aspects, of course.
Absolutely. Well, let me just say a couple of things. One, the reason that Facebook keeps sending you these offers is because they keep track of what you do.
Oh yeah,
So,
sure.
if I happen to look at a picture of a woman in a bikini walking on a beach, then for like the next month, it'll, not that I mind getting those pictures, but then that's what I get all the time. And actually, that is something that Facebook has, however, gotten into trouble for, in particular because it has political consequences that I don't want to particularly go into, but I'll just mention briefly. People here in the United States are probably more aware of it than people maybe in the rest of the world. That what Facebook has done is it has stirred up a lot of these idiotic conspiracy theories, dangerous conspiracy theories, including about COVID, about former President Trump. And the way that Facebook has stirred it up is if you look at a conspiracy theory, if you read a paragraph of an article there, then Facebook says, okay, we know what you're interested in. And then that's what they'll put in your feed. So if there's misinformation online, that technique that Facebook has exacerbates the problem. But let's look at this another way. I think 2008 is a very, very important year because there was a coincidence. As you say, it was the beginning of 23andMe, and even though it was very expensive, you could test your own DNA. It was also the year that the iPhone was introduced, 2007, 2008. It was just a year or so after Twitter began in 2006, and slightly before that, YouTube. So there was a great coincidence. And as a matter of fact, YouTube is nice to think of as a name because YouTube is obviously it's a video, and many people will be watching our conversation on YouTube. But it could also, now that I think about it, be the name of some kind of DNA testing thing, right? You spit into a tube and it shows you who you are.
Yeah,
So
it was kind of perfect storm, what happened in that time at that time. Well, 2008, 2010 and 12, there's no, it's a range of, it didn't happen in one day, of course, but it was a perfect storm because on one side you had DNA technology that evolved in a incredible way. And 2008 it was another milestone in that year, is the introduction of the so-called NGS, the new generation sequencing. It was really like the iPhone for reading the DNA. If you see the graph of the cost for reading the DNA, which is published, you see that in 2008 it plummets. Okay, so from that year you see really a change in the paradigm. Then we started to have all the results from the map of the human genome, and the map of the human genome is the foundation for everything we are talking about today, because every time you read some DNA from someone, you automatically, there are softwares that automatically compare it with the reference, the so-called reference sequence, which is the sequence that was published for the map of the human genome. And then something else was happening outside the world of science, which was the advent of social networks. And so these words combined to give this, what I call the DNA social networks in my book. But it was really a combination of events that was quite unique, I think.
Yeah,
Well, I don't know if it's unique, but it was very particular.
well, it was very powerful. And you often in history have, great coincidences where two inventions which seem to have not that much to do with each other, if they emerge at the same time, suddenly, they can become very, very important. One of the things that's going on now in a completely different area is people trying to get their cars to run on electricity. One of the reasons why the gasoline companies, or the petrol companies, as they say in Europe, became so powerful is that uh, people figured out how to dig for oil just around the time that the first automobiles were invented. So even though there were electrical models back then, suddenly the two became married. So let me ask you this. You have a lot of great examples in the book of all kinds of situations, some humorous, some dangerous. What to you is the most, let's just start with the dangerous. What's the most dangerous use of DNA that you have come across, either and you put it in the book, or it's happened since you wrote the book? And let me just also mention, as you were saying, several people in government around the world have said, you know what, we need everyone. We need every citizen, every human being, every person, in the United States, just so you have a social security card, just like that, you should have your DNA publicly available. But then other people are saying, no, this could be an important, dangerous step towards a totalitarian society. So what would be, an example of that, and what do you think about that?
Well, having your DNA publicly available, it's I, I don't recommend that. Even if many people do that, as people, they go online and they publish whatever about them. They don't care about their privacy. And I think that in my experience and in perspective, the biggest danger of this technology, I mean, I'm not talking about DNA analysis. I'm talking about DNA social networks. So commercial services, there are companies that are online and you send your spit and so on. So what is called consumer genomics. The biggest danger, I think, is related to privacy. Which is very complicated, because people would say, many people would say, okay, so if it's dangerous, I will not use it. But privacy is not an on and off switch. Privacy is more like a volume knob. Some people want to, have special needs, or are in some conditions where they want and they need to put their knob higher. For example, I work and know many families with genetic diseases. So the idea there is that they like to share their sequence so that it becomes easier to get in contact with other people with the same disease. For example, we are talking about very rare disease. It's difficult to even find other patients with the same experience, for example. Or of course, you're hoping to find a cure, or so it depends on who you are and what are you doing at that precise moment. If you are a famous scientist, well, actually, many famous scientists have shared their entire DNA online because they say, okay, I don't care, I have no secrets. This idea of the crystal ball, okay, sorry, of the crystal window, the crystal house, that's okay. I mean, if you are 75 years old, you are 85 years old, or you are a professor at the university, a Nobel laureate, you will never have a problem with the insurance, okay? If you are a very, very rich and famous person, you don't care. Nobody will fire you because you have a predisposition to Alzheimer's. But if you are 30 years old, looking for a job and so on, maybe it's not a very good idea to share all your information. So like anything related to privacy, it's always a game of setting the right volume of what you are sharing and what you are keeping for yourself. But there's another danger which you can it's a danger. It's dangerous even if you don't use these systems. I mean, even if you keep your DNA for yourself, you never use 23andMe, you never send your spit anywhere. Now, the FBI or the police could even knock at your door because there is something called the familiar searching. I think in the United States, you are very familiar with the story of the California killers, of the Golden State Killer. Probably many people will know the story of the Golden State Killer, which I recounting also in the book. But this guy, this killer, was a killer from the 70s, and he was arrested 2 or 3 years ago because they found an old sample of his DNA from a crime scene, and they use it. So they decoded the DNA. They had the file of this DNA. They didn't know who was the owner, and so it didn't match any any database from the FBI or anywhere. But they used these tools online, especially ancestry services. There are some few famous website that you can send your DNA and they find your relatives around by comparing your DNA. So they just sent the file and they found people who were related to this killer. And so they went to interview these people. They were far cousins, and they were they interview these people, and they find, they look at the family tree, and then they narrow the search to this guy, so they could have this guy tested, and it was the same DNA. So what happens now is that actually you have to think your DNA is shared with the rest of your family. So it's not just about thinking what you want to do, but it's a family business. I cannot be one. I can, I don't want to be in a database, for example, but my brother wants, or my cousins are all tested, and they can get to me. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. As far as I am concerned, if my DNA file can help catching a murderer, I am very happy and willing to use it. All right. But the problem is, what is the limit? What is the limit? Now the police is using these tools, which is incredibly powerful. They are solving hundreds and hundreds of cold cases around the world, not only in the United States. But do I want that my DNA is used to catch a dissident? in another country? I don't think so. Or do I want that if someone steals my car, do I want that steals a car? Do I accept that they use this tool to catch a car robber, a car thief, which didn't do anything violent? You know, it's not clear where is the threshold there.
Yeah, those are good questions. One important point I think to keep in mind is that the policing system, the judicial system, at least here in the United States, but I'm sure it's everywhere in the world, is a very imperfect system. So, one of the first public uses of DNA, this goes back to the 90s, was someone who was locked up in prison for 30 years for a murder or a rape. Turns out that they recovered DNA and they're able to analyze it, and it turns out this person is not guilty. The DNA proves that they are innocent. And anyone who has followed the court system and the judicial system knows how important that is. Because after all said and done, what is a trial? It's evidence that's introduced. And if you have a good attorney talking about the evidence, the jury will understand it. If you have a lame attorney who can't do a good job, the jury won't understand it. If you have a judge, for example, there's a trial right now that's concluding in the United States, the trial of a young man by the name of Rittenhouse, who basically with a semi-automatic weapon at a demonstration killed 2 people. So I don't know what the verdict is in that, and that has really nothing to do with DNA. But I don't mind saying publicly, the judge, from what I've seen on television, is one of the worst judges I've ever seen. He screamed and yelled at some point, lost his temper with the prosecutor. He loses his place here and there. But this is what the judicial system is. So I think it's always good, just in that general sense, to bring in some hard evidence. But let me get back to something you said before about Alzheimer's, which I think leads to a very important point. Someone's DNA, they're in their 30s, shows that they are likely, and you might even be able to put a percentage on it, to come down with Alzheimer's in the next, 20, 30 years. But obviously that's not a certainty. And what this gets at is the relationship between genotype and phenotype, right? In other words, you have the genetic code, but even though it can be more or less correlated with and a causation of certain things happening in the phenotype, that is rarely 100% certain. And to get away from murder for a minute, I'm sure we'll get back to it. And I actually can't recall the name of the movie. You might know about it. It was on Netflix about maybe a year ago. And I thought about you when I saw the movie. The plot of the movie was finding your perfect mate through
Yeah.
what was the name of that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right. But it didn't work out all that well. That's why it was an exciting movie. I mean, this, in a way, is the equivalent of Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. The first law is a robot shall never act to hurt a human, or by inaction allow harm to befall a human. But yet his stories are exciting because here's a robot standing over a dead body. So what happened there? So, I think it's this discrepancy between genotype and phenotype that can lead to problems. And I think to some extent, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, scientists may understand this, but I think the average person in the world does not understand it all that clearly. So if they see, for example, here's someone in their 30s, they're very bright, they'd be perfect for this job, but the genotype shows that this is a gene that's correlated in some way with Alzheimer's, but that doesn't mean it's 100% certain the person's going to get Alzheimer's, right?
No, absolutely. The problem for people in medicine, for geneticists, but the beauty for us is that DNA is not destiny. And the idea of DNA tests for before consumer genetics was exactly to was an image. Have in mind an image of a mirror ball, you know, like we want to know our future by looking at our DNA. And then it's funny because this is what scientists were thinking. And there were hundreds and hundreds of scientific papers at the beginning of 23andMe. They were worried. I have a collection of them. They were, you know, very worried that people would test themselves and go to the doctor with their results and say, okay, I'm full of disease. What I'm doing now? So they were very scary of some kind of genochondria. That it didn't happen. It didn't happen. What happened is that people used these tools not to get a mirror ball, but to get a mirror, not to have a crystal ball, but to have a mirror of themselves. So they didn't want to look at their future. They were searching, and they are searching for identity. All these tests about ancestry, you know, people don't buy. This is a statistic. People do not buy. Most people do not buy a DNA kit of looking for disease, predisposition. No, more than 80% of the customers, they buy it for the ancestry applications. And in fact, the biggest sites around the world are ancestry sites like ancestry.com or GEDmatch, which is not commercial, but it's a social network based on DNA. They are ancestry sites. So this wasn't expected, right? Like in science fiction, if you think about, I love science fiction, maybe I'm not as expert as you are, because I missed a lot. I don't have the same big background in the huge background in science fiction, but I looked it up. And if you think about DNA social networks, I couldn't find anyone in science fiction who could think of it ahead. And it happened. So it was something which was out of the radar even of the futurologists. You know, there are thousands of stories, science fiction stories, looking at what we would do with our DNA, but nobody thought about the most simple things, that people would use their own DNA to do what people always do, and get in contact with others, find your roots. In the United States, this is a very big deal. If you think about African Americans, they have, of course, there is a very interesting book about that from a sociologist in the United States, The Social Life of DNA, which is not the same social life I mean in my book. She meant social in the social sense of society. And the book is about what African Americans, how African Americans are actually using this technology to find their roots and to get in contact, how this is changing the approach. This is, it's difficult to explain in a few words, but this is a very big deal. These tools are redefining our identity. So I said, I started with this long introduction to say that yes, of course, part of our DNA results is about predicting our diseases. The problem is that, as you said, genotype and phenotype are two different things in space and time, meaning that some traits, some characters are not entirely due to our DNA. Actually, most of our traits, physical traits, disease predisposition, character traits, they are, there is no gene for them. I mean, there are hundreds of genes that are working together with the environment to give a specific trait. These traits are called multifactorial. Okay, so only a very small minority of our traits are monogenic, meaning that they are due to one or a few genes. So they are easy. It's easy to predict them. If cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disease, okay, if you find the mutation in the DNA, there are many mutations leading to cystic fibrosis. Okay, you know that there is cystic fibrosis and the person will be affected sooner or later. But for example, our age, now we know that there are at least 300 genes that have an influence on our age. So this is the genetic recipe, the genetic basis. And then there is the environment. People, you know, teenagers today, at least in Italy, in Europe, all over Europe, actually, are higher than, are in average, they are higher than we were 50 years ago. Okay. And our DNA as a population hasn't changed, but we came from a war and people didn't eat well. They had diseases. So there are literally hundreds of factors that you should take into account. Even a very, I did the experiment for the book. Even a very simple trait like predicting my eye color or my skin color, it's not so easy. I mean, it's statistic, it's probabilistic. I have, I think 70, I don't remember, but I think of 70, 80% of chances of having brown eyes, which I have, but also 20% chance of having blue eyes. My father had blue eyes. So it's in my genes, but it's recessive. The genotype doesn't become a phenotype.
Yeah.
So it's very complicated, and it's sad for those who would like to predict diseases, which is a good thing. I would like to know if my DNA would tell me, okay, you are a very high risk of having a cancer. I can do something about it. And actually, there are some tests for cancer that work because the probability is so high. Breast cancer, for example, think of Angelina Jolie. It's funny, you know, about communication, because many people, when Angelina Jolie told her story, and I'm sure it was not easy to tell that story for a person like her. Some people, even women, were criticizing, saying, "Yeah, why you know, you remove your breast, your femininity because of a risk, only because of a risk." But that risk was almost 90%.
Right.
Okay, so in this case, it is still a probability, but it's so overwhelming that it's this decision-making tool in this case, I think. In other cases, it is not. Would you remove your prostate because so getting all the risk of the surgery and so on, because you know you have 30% a 30% higher risk than the average of having a cancer one day? I don't think I would. But it's or for Alzheimer's, we have some particular mutations. If they are there, you can have up to 70% risk of having Alzheimer one day. And when I looked at my results, my DNA results, there was a lock in that result. So I had to click a few disclaimers before knowing. And I didn't want to know. And the reason is very simple. And this is another important aspect. If you want to use something like DNA analysis as a decision making, as a decision tool, you have to do something. I mean, you have to know that you can do something about it. And if you know you have a high risk of Alzheimer's today, you can do anything to improve the situation. So it's just about, I want to know or I don't want to know, but I cannot do anything about it. This is another very important aspect. Many people would like to know the results, but there is nothing they can do about it. And I think this is the main point to decide whether you want to know a DNA results or not. It is just like, any kind of risk. Do you want to know about the risk of an earthquake if you are locked into a cell, inside a cell, and someone has lost their keys and you cannot run and nobody will open the door? Do I want to know or not? It's totally subjective and personal. So the idea of using these tests to discriminate people in the work or about for their disorders, it's more in science fiction than in reality, because even guys at the insurance, people in the insurance, they reason in terms of statistics. Okay, so if your probability of getting a disease is not that high, it doesn't change much. Also, what happens is that it's the same variant or the same mutation, same DNA variant or mutation could give you higher risk of a disease, but could protect you from another disease, and you may not even know about that. So there are laws. The law in the United States and in Europe also forbids insurance company about using that DNA results. There are more exceptions actually in the United States than here in Europe. Here the rules are stricter, and I think it's better. For example, for life insurance, the insurance company, I think in the United States, they can ask you for the result of a DNA test. They cannot force you to do a DNA test, but if you did a DNA test before, they want to know. But actually, the real discrimination I see it happening for people who have rare genetic disorders, because these disorders are really linked to your DNA. So if you see a mutation for a genetic disease like rare disease like muscular dystrophy or other rare diseases like that, you are pretty sure that this person will have a disease, even if you didn't see the person. So if you think about this, there is a minority of people who, for these people, DNA is really destiny. some way. So we have really to protect these people from, from themselves, from sharing the results putting the results in the wrong hands, and also from discrimination. But we have been, commercial genetic tests have been around for almost a decade now, and we don't hear of many people discriminated on their job or whatever. There are other types of discrimination, sadly, that work better than the DNA at this moment.
Yeah, but unfortunately, history shows over and over again when new technologies are invented, sometimes they lay dormant, in terms of use for decades. And then someone suddenly realizes, hey, we can do this and that, and then it becomes huge overnight. Television, a completely different technology, was actually first demonstrated in the late 1920s. But for 20 or more years, there was really hardly any television. And then suddenly in the late 1940s, boom, it caught on. And within 10 years, it became the most popular medium in the United States.
We don't know what's going to happen in the future, of course. I think the idea of discrimination is more dangerous than the scientific possibility of doing it. If you want to discriminate someone, you can always look at the DNA of this person and find an excuse to discriminate this person. So I think that's the major danger there. Of course, when genetics will be more advanced, it will also be easier and to predict diseases starting from the DNA, and do what Gattaca, the movie Gattaca. What happened in the movie Gattaca? It's a dystopic movie where the people are really it's a society based on DNA discrimination. But this is a science fiction movie, okay? It can be totally true, and the reality is that not everything we are and will be, it is written in the DNA. So there will always be a part of our character, big part of our character, and a big part of our future that is not written in the DNA. So not even the most advanced DNA test could detect it. And this is somewhere, in some way, this is good, because it is a degree of liberty for us.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, by the way, to get back to, breast removal, prostate surgery, and so on, the other side of this, of course, is that our understanding of DNA and medicine in general could come up with a treatment that could fight the cancer and kill the cancer. And obviously, immunotherapy, which is not, quite, DNA, but in a way it's sort of related, monoclonal antibodies. That kind of therapy is being increasingly used to treat all kinds of cancers, including breast cancer. So one of the other possibilities, increasingly possible, is your DNA shows that you have a 90% propensity to get this cancer, but we may well be moving towards a society, well, okay, we'll keep an eye on you for sure, but if you begin to get it, we can give you this very sophisticated treatment. It's no longer just chemotherapy and that kind of thing. So that's another reason why I think science, even though it creates problems, also has the wherewithal for the solution to the problem.
Well, it's happening. It's not in the future.
Right.
What you're talking about is happening right now.
That's right.
it's called pharmacogenomics. So the idea of developing and prescribing drugs based on different genetic backgrounds, different genetic profiles is already there. If you think of the drugs, the new drugs that were approved recently in cancer, in oncology, basically most of them, if not all, are in jargon it's called stratified therapy, which means that they have been developed and tested on specific types of people with a specific mutation. Cancer is a genetic disease. There are many mutations that one after the other lead to invasion and cancer and so on. And so the idea, but it's already happening to analyze people cancer and to see some genetic markers in the cancer cell and to get the treatment right for this mutation. It's happening more and more, but it's really not science fiction. Hundreds and thousands of people are being cured, treated right now with this idea. And also, I would add that it's fantastic to see this home genomics, this idea of spitting in the tube. You can use it also for looking at your DNA and find the basis for your cancer, for example. I know people, and I have helped some people I know to get their DNA tested with this service, not 23andMe, other type of companies which will give you a full sequence of your genome, which is more useful for medical application like this one. 23andMe will give you a genotype which is based on 1,000,000 points of your genome, but they don't read all your DNA. It's not necessary for what they do. Yeah. They will do it in the future. So for now, today, for $300, $300, you can have your entire DNA sequence, so read, decoded, with the quality that is the same that medical laboratory use. So you can really, what happens is that I know people with the cancers, rare cancers, and they don't know what, they don't have any diagnosis about the genetic mutation that causes this cancer because they are rare. It's not easy. So what they do is that get their DNA sequenced by a medical laboratory or by these services, and then you do it once. Then you have a file, a big file or a small file, it depends, with all the DNA sequence, and you can send this file to 100 researchers around the world, and they use this file in their softwares to compare this file with millions of other files. And if there's a statistical match between a rare cancer and a certain mutation, you can find it. And that is really, really amazing and fantastic. But it's happening right now. It's not science fiction, and this is incredible.
It is incredible. By the way, there's a whole wonderful history of science fiction inspiring real science. I can think of two examples. Marvin Minsky was a leading AI, artificial intelligence scientist working at MIT. He made all kinds of breakthroughs. He always said he was inspired by Isaac Asimov's robot stories. And then Paul Krugman, who was a Nobel laureate in economics, said he was inspired by Isaac Asimov's Foundation series and Harry Seldon. So, I always think that science fiction in many ways is the cutting edge of human literature, in part because it does inspire real science. By the way, as far as your knowledge of science fiction, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's excellent because you read my novel, The Silk Code, and you quoted it, in your book. So,
Oh
you
yeah.
don't have to go any further than that. Um, but let's conclude with
It was right. Your novel was right. Was what I really needed at that moment, because I was thinking what would happen if for a for a trick of the evolution, Neanderthals would be among us. And I was thinking about discrimination, about human races. A large part of my book is about using these tools in ancestry and the impact they have on the social impact they have on the concept of human races. And if we had a Neanderthal alive today, and it could happen. I mean, your book is science fiction, but it's we could have a Neanderthal. It was just a fortuitous events in evolution that they disappeared. But we are actually, I think, perhaps one of the few species in the world, we humans, Homo sapiens, are one of the few species in the world that do not have close relative species. If you want to find our closest relative genetically, we have to go to the chimpanzee, because all the other Homo, the other species of Homo disappeared, and it wasn't our fault. We didn't probably. I don't think we killed them all. Okay, even the Neanderthals. There are different theories, but probably we didn't kill them totally. So if you and the idea is if you want to think of what a human race would really be, because there are no human races there, so there is only one species, and there are populations, but they are not human races, because there are not genetically defined races. In the book I explain why, but Neanderthals would actually be another human race, and it would be funny because they would need the different seats in an airplane. They would use different computer keyboards because their hands would be not the same as ours, and so on and so on. So I always, when I talk to racists, I don't talk to racists that much, but I would say, do you really want to see a different human race? Think of Neanderthals, but we don't have Neanderthal. So it was very nice to read your book, and I also there's a movie that I saw recently where it's an European movie. I think it's Swedish. I don't know if you saw that in the US, and it's about a woman and a man living today, and they don't say Neanderthal explicitly, but they are kind of Neanderthals living today, and they have a very a very high sense of smell, for example. And it's funny, it's almost in the line of your book. I don't know if you saw it, but yeah, I
No,
recommend it.
I'll watch it. Well, it's very hard. Whoever wrote that script for that movie probably read my book, but that's okay.
Probably.
That's the way life is. Um, let's just wrap this up by getting back. I mentioned early on to COVID and disease, and just a couple of thoughts. And I'd be interested in what your response is. One of the things that has struck me throughout this pandemic, and you probably know this even better than I, during the Middle Ages and for hundreds of years, and maybe even going back to ancient times, there was the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, and in some cases it wiped out as many as 3/5 of the population of some cities. They had no antibiotics back then. They certainly had no vaccinations. Their medical knowledge was minimal. They actually knew a little bit about social distancing and wearing masks, which were, and that's probably saved some lives. But it's interesting to think about the fact that we are the descendants of those 2/5 of the population. Did they survive because they had a genetic advantage over those who didn't? In other words, something in their genome enabled them to better fight off the bubonic plague. And then the other aspect of this is, there's been a lot of attention, and attention should be paid to the mRNA vaccines. People mistakenly think it has something to do with DNA, and obviously it's related in some way. But wouldn't it be good if, in addition to a vaccine, we could develop something that would, in effect, slightly alter our DNA so that we could just fight it off all the time rather than having to get boosters every year and so on? So what are your thoughts about that?
So you mean something that would accelerate our evolution? Well, it's complicated, because every time you do that, you have cancer. Right. Evolution works also it works by generations. We are not bacteria. Evolution works because mutation exists. So you have thousands and millions of mutations happening every day, and then some mutation are just the right thing that this species or this individual need to adapt to their specific environment. I'm making evolution very simple, and sorry if some evolution I see, like the laser target when they are trying to shoot you. I feel like they are trying to shoot me, but I'm trying to make it very simple. It's not really like that, but the idea is that evolution works because there are mutations. So the idea is, okay, should we mutate more often so that we adapt faster? To adapt faster, first of all, it's not a matter of how we mutate, it's a matter of how many generations we do, because virus evolves very much faster because they do a generation in 20 minutes. Right. We have 25 years for a generation. So we should, make a generation faster, which is not really what I would recommend today for the human species. We are already, too many. So, and the environment is not happy. So, but we can do something smarter. We can modify our genes. So we can engineer our own genes so that we can adapt. And so in some way we can change our DNA and create artificial mutations that help us to cope, to adapt. And we can do it today with CRISPR. CRISPR is a technology that we can use to edit DNA, even in living persons. So without waiting for a mutation to pass through the generations. And CRISPR is a very, very incredibly powerful technique. They are using it almost everywhere in the labs, and you can do incredible things. And it's also, it's very complicated to explain. It would take me half an hour to explain how it works, but it's very easy to do. So there are even people who are buying CRISPR kits online, and they're using CRISPR on CRISPRs on on yeast or bacteria in culture and so on, just to see how it works. But medically, there are a few applications of, for example, there is a child, a young girl. She had incurable cancer, incurable leukemia, and they could, cure this kid with CRISPR. So what happened is that they use this technology to alter her genes. It was a mutation that was causing the cancer, and they could cancel editing. They could edit out this mutation, which is fantastic. Of course, there are ethical issues, not in this case, I think, but in theoretically, in theory, you could use this CRISPR technique or editing to change the DNA of a person in a way that the change is transmitted to the other generation. It depends which kind of cells you change. Okay, so if you change the germinal cells, the cells that produce the sperm and the eggs, this mutation, this change will be transmitted to the future generation. And what's happening now is that there is, without even waiting for the law, researchers using CRISPR all over the world have decided about a moratorium. So nobody is using that technique in the germ line.
That's too bad, though, because what you're saying, just as we've been talking about, sure, we can all see terrible results from that if racists got, in power. But at the same time, if it could cure a girl who had cancer, or if she wouldn't have cancer in the first place, that would be, I think, a wonderful result. Apropos of science fiction, this, of course, is what Aldous Huxley was talking about in Brave New World, which was written back in the 1930s. So, that, and he, by the way, was, I think, a nephew of Thomas Huxley, who was known as Darwin's bulldog. So Aldous Huxley came by his understanding of genetics, honestly, so to speak. His uncle or great uncle having been, such a close associate of Darwin.
But the idea, the ethical dilemma here, of course, we are giving up some potentially fantastic applications, but that's the idea of ethical dilemmas. You have something that it's useful, but you have to give it up because it's not, it's unethical. The ethical dilemma is that we are betting, we are modifying the generations to come, and which will, I mean, it's not necessarily bad. I agree with you, but it's probably too early to decide that. We are imposing that to our son, to our children, to our grandchildren. Are we ready to do that? Probably not. Even because today we can do it for the people who are living today, and it works. So people are saying, okay, let's do it. Let's do it now. It works. Let's not, exaggerate and do it on the future generation. It will be their business if they want to do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair enough in this way, Also, there are other systems, there are other technologies to avoid people, for example, to make a diagnosis of genetic diseases before birth, for example, and even to treat them. Or you can even use CRISPR, so modify the genes in the newborn or even in the womb, but without changing the germline. So the idea is that we have a technology that we can do it with technology without even the necessity of changing the germline.
Well,
It would be a stunt.
Well, yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, look, it's a question of, you're completely right about ethical dilemmas, because what makes them dilemmas is there are two incompatible choices, and which one do you go with? My thinking, and this is one of the effects, one of the many effects of the pandemic. So here in the United States, we've lost over 700,000 people. Worldwide, it's in the millions. And I'm not saying that we even had the ability to do that, before the pandemic, but we all know, okay, these vaccines are making us relatively safe from COVID. Even if we get infected, we're not going to be hospitalized. All that is great. But we all know that sooner or later, there's going to be another, plague that comes along. And
okay, I know, I see what you mean, but if you are talking about about infections, about viruses and so on, well, that's the answer is easier. Our immune system has been selected for millions of years to be the most effective system that we can have, and provided that our body has to do many other things, not only defend itself. So and also it's always a war game between us and the pathogens. So we have a very good system to be prepared, which is vaccination. Vaccination is a way that actually, if I told you how the immune system works, you would see that when you do a vaccination, or when you meet a pathogen or a virus in nature, there's actually a natural selection in your immune cells, in your lymphocytes, that happens almost in real time, and only the blood cell that casually, by chance, is producing the antibody against that virus is selected in days. So we are actually doing that in another way. We are not changing our DNA, but we are doing it indirectly. And I see it would be very difficult to have a system that make us immune to everything, or even make our immune system stronger. When our system becomes too strong, we have diseases. It starts to attack our cells, our own cells. Yeah. It's tricky. I think we have everything we need, or almost everything we need, to face with the risk of pandemics, but we should do it. The problem for the next pandemic is that we are still doing the same thing as before, and we still have places in the world where wild species and humans are too close, and spillover can happen anytime. We should start from there, I think. For the rest, I'm sorry to say that we have always lived in a dangerous world, and I like the I don't know if it's in the, I don't remember if it's in the original book, but in Spielberg's movie words science fiction, what's the English for wars of the world.
Yeah, the H.G. Wells novel.
Yeah, H.G. Wells.
War of the Worlds.
There's this scene. I don't remember reading it in the book. Maybe it wasn't in the book. There's this wonderful scene at the beginning and at the end, and there's a voiceover saying, "We deserved, we humans, we species on Earth, we deserved to be there. You aliens didn't deserve because we stayed here for billions of years, and billions of individuals have died, to make us resistant to the bacteria that are in the environment, in the air. And as a matter of fact, I don't want to spoil the story, but it's so.
I know.
As a matter of fact, the aliens, they die because they die of infection. They are not you. And I was really enthusiastic about this. It's really the last seconds of the movie, and it's great because it's a very great explanation, a hypothesis, I think, of what would happen if if an alien species similar to us, with this biology that is similar to us, would come here. They would probably die from the first bacteria they meet, because they didn't deserve to be here.
That is a great line in the movie. I'm not sure if it's in the novel. By the way, it's a brilliant novel even without that, because that was in effect the punch in the gut ending. It looked like in the novel and in the movie like it was hopeless for our poor species, but bacteria that we were immune to came to the rescue and wiped out the aliens. H.G. Wells was a brilliant thinker, way ahead of his time. Any of his books are well worth reading. He also started the tradition of writing time travel novels, and all kinds of great books.
Well, the theory of germs became in the late 19th century, so probably I'm not sure he would have think about it, but he was a visionary, so maybe.
Yes. No, he would have known about that, because the germ theory, Louis Pasteur, Edward Koch in Germany, they were already, I think, like in the 1870s, certainly 1880s, Pasteur was coming up with ways of dealing with rabies and so on.
Yes.
So I think that H.G. Wells would have known that. Whenever there's like a list of people, if you could travel back in time and have a conversation with, H.G. Wells would be pretty high up on my list.
Yeah.
But I'm more than happy to have had this conversation with you. This has been a wonderful conversation. And
you are having a conversation with H.G. Wells by proxy, by talking to me.